Hi, my name is Lijia Zhang, or Zhang Lijia as we would say in China. I'm the author of this book, Socialism is Great. The book is a memoir about my life working at a missile factory in the 80s in China. It's a memoir, autobiography. So when I tell people that I recently published a memoir, people sometimes look at me up and down and said, "How old are you?" And I often joke that if you don't plan to marry me, why would you care how old I am? I think traditionally people often write a memoir when they reach their old age and looking back at their life. Or people who, those famous people, or people achieved very highly in life. I think I haven't achieved very highly yet, and I'm not that old, though probably older than I look. I think a modern memoir has changed. If anybody has an interesting or compelling story to tell, I hope my story is interesting and compelling enough. I was born in Nanjing on the banks of Yangtze River. I grew up in a residential compound which belonged to the factory my mother worked for all her life. It was, among other things, the factory produced missiles, intercontinental missiles, that were capable of reaching North America. Anyway, I always dreamed to become a writer and journalist, but my dream was shattered in 1980. When I was 16. Now you can work out how old I am. Anyway, when I was 16, my mother just took me out of school to put me to work at the factory she used to work for. I think that was an economic decision. My mother being uneducated, and she thought the best thing a mother could do was to secure a job for her daughter, especially in a job at a state-owned factory like my factory. Anyway, I became a factory worker. The job I was assigned to was to test a pressure gauge. It was very simple and repetitive. When I tell people that I worked at a rocket factory for 10 years, people often go, "Wow, that must be amazing." I can only describe this 10 years as, mind-numbing, so destroying experience. There are so many rules, so many controls. The first day at the factory, we were told we were not allowed lipsticks, no high heel shoes. Within 3 years of entering the factory, we were not allowed to date. So there's a long list of rules. Nothing was personal. Every month, women workers had to go to the hygiene room to virtually show blood to the so-called period police to show we were not pregnant. And that was all done in the name of taking care of female workers' social welfare, but effectively part of the strict family planning control. Just give you another example. I'm one of the few Chinese who got naturally curly hair, but my boss thought I wear a perm. So I worked at the factory for 10 years. I never got a promotion because, in those days, only people with bourgeoisie outlook in life would wear a perm. So I didn't deserve promotion. So I was so bored. I was so fed up with all these rules. So as an escape route, I began to teach myself English in the hope of getting a job as an interpreter outside the factory. Of course, now looking back, learning English changed my life because it broadened my horizon. Once I began to learn English, I became fascinated by this language system, so different from our characters. And of course, what I learned was not just ABC, but the whole cultural package. I was fascinated. It was quite difficult in those days to learn English. I just became obsessed and fascinated and obsessed in learning language. Sometimes I caught myself cycling my bicycle in the street and talking to English myself, or singing English songs, like a carpenter songs, and sing a song. Anyway, I was sometimes some of my colleagues laughed at me because sometimes they caught me, talking English to myself. They would call me fake foreigners, or they would laugh at my effort in learning English. They called me a toad who dreams to eat swan's meat. That means I'm dreaming to something, something impossible. It's so funny, the toad and frog. But anyway, originally my book my book was called A Frog in a Well, from our philosopher Zhang's story about this frog being trapped in the bottom of the well, couldn't see a great world beyond but the patch of sky. So for many years, for 10 years while I was working at the factory, I just felt my life was like a frog being trapped in the bottom of the factory well. What got me out of factory, apart from the help from many of my friends, is the tool of English language, because it really brought a new, bright new word, brave new word to me. And also slowly I got this concept of individualism. So I slowly dared to be different. I dared to wear a short skirt. I had a boyfriend. I even dared to pursue sex. When my English improved, I began to listen to BBC and VOA, which broadcast news very different from our propaganda. So I just began to question some of the values we have been indoctrinated. So by 1989, I organized the biggest demonstration among factory workers in support the democratic movement led by students started in Tiananmen. That movement in 1989, of course, it was more than just a student movement. It started there in Tiananmen, but grown to be a nationwide movement. I took part in that movement. And so this book is very much, Socialism is Great, is very much a journey of both sexual and political awakening. And interestingly, that journey also reflects what China went through in the 80s. And for me, many of my friends, 80s was the most fascinating era in China, because that's the time China began to change. Deng Xiaoping introduced reform, which transformed China beyond the economic fields. And things just began to change. There was still so much passion, still so much idealism. I was a factory worker. I was busy, reading poems and writing poems with our friends. We were talking about politics and discussing what was China's future. Would a Western-style democracy the answer to Chinese people? Today, China has become far more commercialized, and young people don't read so much. I'm not interested in politics the same way we were. And also the 80s, we 80s saw some of the finest writing and artwork as well, because after so many years, artists were not allowed to express themselves, and then there was just a little bit of freedom. 80s saw the outburst of creativity. So 80s in many ways was the time China became what it is today. So it's a defining era. Anyway, that's another reason why I decided to write my book about my experience in the 80s. So I did some research and I realized there was very few books set in the 80s. That's how I decided to write this book. And also, I just think there are quite a lot of memoirs in China about China, but mostly about the sufferings, the bittering set during the Cultural Revolution. I think probably people are fed up a little bit with the so-called mislit, or the miserable suffering tales. And in my book, I hope it's more upbeat. It's more positive. It's about chasing your dream, pushing the boundary. And also, it's a very funny book. And for me, the humor is very important. And life is often hard, and it's important to have some humor. And it is easy read because I don't know complicated words, and it will probably likely make you cry, and will definitely make you laugh. If it don't make you cry or laugh, come to get me the refund.